Good afternoon, Frank.
Hello, Professor.
Another exciting week.
Yes.
The economic news and political news. It's difficult to know where to start. I started reading this morning the Economist's annual bonus issue, which sums up the last year and looks forward to the coming year. I don't know whether you see that or not.
I do not.
It's always very interesting. I started reading it with the one in 2000, which summed up the past century and looked forward into the coming century. But usually it's once a year, look a year at a time. Anyway, one of the most interesting things that it said in the introductory article was that the place of democracy in international discourse is changing, and probably the relationship between economic success and political success is changing as well. I imagine that the British economy was the largest or one of the largest in the 19th century, and the American economy in most of the 20th century. And it's amazing that despite the growth of China over the last 3 decades, the American economy seems to be more resilient than any other economy in the world still, because it's according to the way economists measure things, at any rate, it's doing quite well again, better than any other, although the English is not doing too badly. But Europe is awful. Japan is awful, and China is causing some sort of worry. However, if you look at things economically. If you look at things politically, apart from the news about Obama's attempts with Iran and with Cuba and various other things, he's not really achieving anything yet. And America is beginning to be seen in other parts of the world as a country that is not such a good model for getting things done. And some people are not thinking of it as being the banner for democracy that it used to be, since the government simply isn't working. But now there's the interesting problem in Hong Kong between the idea of absolute local choice and the government's idea that it should be choice within limits. But generally, the countries that are getting things done are not the democratic countries.
Well, I think this is a topic that we discuss often about the effects of globalization on democracy.
Yeah.
And how, in fact, democracy in some ways is outmoded,
But it's just us before, and now it's the Economist.
Yes, I'm very happy to hear that. I thought it was just the two of us, lonely voices, mainly. But I think it may be true that 100 years or so in the future, people may look back at Obama's time as president and recognize that perhaps this is when the change began to be noticed, that democracy as such needed to be revised, enhanced. It's almost like a sort of computer code that needs to have an upgrade.
It needs to be worked out afresh.
I think so.
Because the versions of it that we try to apply now were worked out for societies that were much smaller than the current societies. And of course, the one model of democracy that seems to be working quite well still is the British one, which has and England's population is roughly the same as it was 50 years ago, whereas all the others are much larger. And I think that you just cannot manage a population of 1.5 billion people, expecting where everybody is paying attention to how the government is formed, and expect everybody to be able to play a part in choosing a government that is going to satisfy everybody. And it's probably not only India and China are going to have that problem, but America as well, because that's essentially what's happening at the moment, that we can't seem to put together a government that works, that satisfies everybody.
I agree with that, but I would respectfully submit that both India and China in particular, have yet to go through that social transformation of really substantial economic and educational disparity. I know we often talk about how that exists in the United States, but I don't think any reasonable person can say that the disparity in the United States is analogous, for example, to what might exist in China or what might exist in India. So,
Well, the China has the problem of the relationship between the Han and the ethnic minorities, especially the Uyghur up in the northwest.
yes, but
Uh,
there's still an awful lot of poverty, agricultural, rural poverty in China, backwardness in China.
but not so bad as in India, I think.
I would agree with that.
Something about Chinese society that seems to be much easier to change than Indian society. Um, though it's not easy I mean, I can make arguments about why that should be, but it's not easy.
Hmm.
And of course, neither of them have quite the same sort of race problem we have in this society,
Hmm.
which seems to be returning to the headlines again.
Hmm.
Um, and of course, similar things are beginning to be issues in Europe because of migration.
Right,
And The
right,
Economist pays a lot of attention to that, the
right.
problem that in almost every European country, there's a growth of groups that are against immigration that are
Hmm.
being called right wing, but it seems
Hmm.
to be that this division between right wing and left wing is out of date. Um,
I,
that it's not simply a division between people who don't want change and people who do want change. It's people who don't want immigrants and people who do want immigrants.
yeah,
It's
there's
not the same thing.
there are many more nuances
Yeah.
that exist than can be accommodated by a simple up or down majority vote every 4 years, or every 6 years in the Senate, or every 2 years in the House. And I don't know. I mean, we sometimes speculate on this. I don't know what the answer is going to be. We're going
Well,
to get involved in some endless California-like Proposition 100, Proposition 6,000, Proposition 62,000 that's nationally voted on over people's iPhones. I mean, is this where it's going to go? Why not? I mean, some people would say that would be the purest form of democracy. Where,
well, you've got some systems where the government can decide to call an election whenever it wants to, and others that
right?
have to wait till the time period is up. And it's interesting that I think in the past week, two governments have called snap elections, right? Japan and
Israel,
Israel.
that's right.
Uh,
But
and
I'm not that big a fan of snap elections. Look at the track record in Italy since the end of the Second World War.
well, they always play into the hands of the party in power because
Hmm.
it means it can choose the time to do it
Right.
and give very little notice to the other parties.
Hmm.
However, they usually do it because they have a problem and they don't always get their own way. And the outcome in Israel is going to be very interesting because whatever happens, whether Netanyahu does win or not, it's going to change his coalition and therefore change the international face of Israel at a time when I got the impression this past week that Kerry and Obama through Kerry presumably, was putting a lot of pressure on Netanyahu over Palestine and the UN process,
Yeah.
the UN.
Yeah. Yeah. But the interesting thing, I read an article about that, is that Netanyahu has almost a secret weapon, and that is that the people in Israel who are to his right actually are quite substantial in
Mhm.
number. And it could be that in some ways his decision to call for the snap election is to maybe say, okay, all right, you keep pushing me from Washington and elsewhere in Europe, we'll have this election. And then let's see who's going to pop up in the Knesset now to my right. That's going to make me look like a centrist. I mean, there are
It,
people there who are going to, die before they cede any of the settlements, this sort of thing.
it's interesting that I think this process began before the year 2000 and has gradually continued to strengthen
Hmm.
of a return to religion and the growth of people with very orthodox or old, or what should I say, traditional religious ideas. And you can see it in Israel, you can see it in Muslim countries, you can see it also I think, in this country.
Hmm.
Um, the so religion has become a way to hold on to the past. Religion is playing a very different role in international affairs from the role it played in the colonial period.
Hmm. Well, it also played a bit of a role, a return, a Back to the Future role with with yesterday's announcement about the normalization of relations between the United States and Cuba. And the Pope was apparently quite heavily involved in that.
Well, I saw that, and I don't quite understand yet just exactly what the involvement of the Pope was. The other role of religion is apparently the Russians who are volunteering to go to eastern Ukraine and fight for for the Russian speakers in eastern Ukraine
Hmm.
are Orthodox religious activists.
They could be some of those Peter the Great old believers who are stuck out in those
I
forests and
don't know
finally
whether
coming
they're
to the
actually old
surface.
believers, but it's another religious movement.
Yes, yes.
Uh, and of course, this is another a case of the different change in the relationship between economics and politics.
Hmm.
Everybody thinks we don't have to worry about Putin because his economy is dying,
Hmm.
but in fact, he's not losing his popularity or his
Right,
ability to do things.
right, right. His
And this is
popularity
very
is still
true.
high.
Yeah. Uh,
He
yeah.
had he had a very interesting press conference earlier.
Yeah.
One of the many nuggets of information he dropped is that he thinks that a deal is imminent on the Iranian nuclear situation between the West and Iran. He also said that his personal life is fine, thanks for asking, even though he's been divorced, and his shoulders seemed fine. He also he was all over the map, but I must commend him on his bladder control. He sat there for 3 hours without leaving, as he usually does. So.
Uh, no, it's very interesting the way things are changing at the moment. There seems to be a change in the quality of the process of change every week. I
Mhm.
think different sorts of things stand out, and I think Obama is the effort over Cuba, which is getting a lot of opposition, not only in Congress, but also from the early immigrants from Cuba,
Hmm. Yes.
um, is adding to a part of his reputation that was not getting enough attention before, that he is, despite what he's doing with drones, which I think pleases a different sort of
Constituency.
constituency. He seems to be, and this may be part of his effort for the last 2 years of his 2 terms in order to try to shape his legacy, focusing on things that people would have wanted him to do when they voted for him. Because there seems to be more of an effort to make sure that Guantanamo is
Yeah,
closed before the end of his time.
I've noticed
So,
that.
so one wonders what else he has in mind.
Well, let me change topics a little bit. I was in Manhattan on Saturday night and was taking a crosstown taxi ride that became interminable and quite expensive because of the "I Can't Breathe" protests that were marching down Broadway in response to the failure of a grand jury to indict a New York City police officer for the chokehold death of a suspect. During that interminable cab ride, I had the opportunity to speak to the driver, who was a very well-spoken Pakistani gentleman who, in response to my question as to why does the ISIS continue to maintain the links that they do to the Taliban, went off on a quite predictable response, talking about the need to be able to influence the Taliban to protect Pakistan against India. No more than 48 hours later, of course, the carnage occurred at the school in Peshawar. And then 24 hours later, I noticed in the media that it looked as if this might have been the straw that broke the camel's back. In this case, the middle class, the emerging middle class of Pakistan that is developing, that exists per this taxi driver as well. And the comments I've begun to see now is that this truly is a scourge that has finally been brought to the forefront, and everybody is unanimous that it has to be stopped. Now, I don't know if it'll just dribble away and drift away, but
Well, I'm glad you brought this up because I was just reading that of the 140 odd people, mostly children, who were killed, two of them, one 12-year-old and one 6-year-old, were beheaded.
I saw that.
The account that I read of this said that the purpose of all this was to terrorize the middle class. The problem with Pakistan is not only that it's 4 separate provinces that most of which were not interested in the formation of Pakistan in the first place, though they were majority Muslim, but also that within those provinces it's several different societies superimposed on each other. And the middle class has been growing for a long time, and possibly the growth of the middle class will solve a lot of the other problems, because if there's a middle class with a national sensitivity, then that may finally produce a national awareness that Pakistan has failed to develop so far. And it did seem to me that Nawaz Sharif came out looking much better after his response to that massacre than he has out of previous problems that he's had since he became prime minister. This time, although Pakistan has so many problems that it's difficult to see what the future is going to be. And of course, another thing happened today, which was the release of somebody that was involved in the Mumbai.
Oh, I saw that. Yes, yes.
Which has led to India to react against Pakistan, whereas India had been very sympathetic to Pakistan over the massacre.
Well, I think that this could be the kind of event that cuts across all social strata and all tribal strata. And I mean, it's just horrifying. And it doesn't necessarily, you don't have to have a national middle class awareness first. This can act almost as the instigator or the spark to create that, and demand from the government just some basic protections, like children not being beheaded in schools.
It's difficult to see how this use of religion to hold on to the past is going to work out. But there's one other thing I must bring up before we finish today, which is something that happened on campus this week that was relevant to your taxi ride. The president of the university was giving a party for students. A group of students who had not been invited broke into the party, shouting, "I can't breathe," and lying on the floor. And the president lay on the floor with them.
Oh, wow. Wow. Just like that.
And there were police there, and they were horrified. And they made very rough protests about the president's behavior. And the president was very clever not to respond to the police, but to have I'm not sure what her formal title is, Maureen Rush, who's the head of university security and has some sort of vice presidential title, I think, to respond to them. So that she came out looking very good.
Good for her.
I mean, it's very few people are able to manage a situation like that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and turn it to, I mean, that sounds
But
horrible to say, but turn it to her advantage.
I think that it shows that this problem that's developed in this country is, I think, going to become a bigger problem in the coming weeks because more and more cases of blacks at a disadvantage in front of police are being brought forward.
I agree with you.
So we'll look for them next.
Next time.
Yeah.
All right, Brian, Merry Christmas, and
Enjoy your holidays.
I'll talk to you later. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.